And we're now joined by Sandra Araullo of ATR Asset Management. Sandra, good afternoon and welcome on the program.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
So the PSEI made a sudden U-turn at the close after trading lower for the day. It also posted stronger value turnover. Are we seeing some technical decline and profit-taking intraday, especially in mining and oil? And if so, where do you think the recovery came from? Are you expecting more movement after the GDP report tomorrow, or do you think it's already been priced into the market?
So definitely market participants are going to be looking at the data tomorrow. And while, it's pretty much been a dismal performance for the index year to date. We've seen a bit of a reprieve in the past month. And I think aside from the macro data that's being priced in, it's really also earnings that are coming in at least in line, if not better than full year expectations. So perhaps it's enough to cause a bit of a momentum to the upside, at least through the third quarter of the year.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, in the U.S., they had 2 quarters of GDP contraction, Sandra, but factors including employment and consumption were high, and so they're hard put to call it a recession. Here in the Philippines, we're about to have our GDP report this week, better than most neighbors in the region, but our employment is flat and consumption is lower. The government also adjusted lower the last GDP print. What are your expectations for this coming quarter's GDP report, and where do you think the growth will be coming from?
We actually have an optimistic outlook for the GDP print, and this is primarily because of the reopening theme of the Philippine economy for 2021. There's been an inventory shock in the first quarter, which has been a result of easing restrictions. We are the least sensitive when it comes to global economic slowdown. The driving factors for the US and the Philippines are actually quite different, where in the US, the economy has been humming along and in fact overheating a little bit. And so that's where we're seeing a bit of, or that's where the risk of recession is already the narrative. Whereas in the Philippines, because of the delay in opening, we're only starting to see really a recovery from when we had ended before the pandemic. So it's a little bit of a delayed productivity number that is expected to show up in the numbers. So we think that from a macro perspective, the probability of recession is still, globally in the US is still pretty intact. And whereas in the Philippines, we do expect a stronger print, which does not necessarily, or at least has been not reflecting in the pricing in the markets.
Mm-hmm. And so how do you expect the BSP to decide in the coming monetary policy meeting, and maybe how many more hikes until the end of the year?
The latest inflation print, which came in at 6.4%, is actually an indication that inflation is yet to slow down. And actually, the BSP has indicated a little bit of hawkishness on their part from where we stood, at least up to the first half of the year. And they will be hard-pressed to slow down on hiking rates. In the next meeting, there is an expectation of a 25 to 50 basis point hike in line with the continuation of inflation to the upside. But there is a high likelihood for another 75 basis point hike just to drive home and really get ahead of the second round effects. Because while we expect actually favorable GDP print tomorrow, the risk it's still consumption led, and the risk remains that because of second round inflation, that can hamper the momentum behind the reopening or the economic activity. So we would actually be it would be good to see a little bit more resolve and proactivity, or at least an urgency on the part of the BSP to get ahead of this inflation number.
All right, Sandra Araullo of ATR Asset Management, a pleasure to speak with you today, and thank you so much for the market guidance. We appreciate it.
Thank you.